Afternoon. We'll call the meeting to order. First item of business, we'll open the hearing on House Bill 2630. Revisor Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2630 would establish fees for the transportation of certain radioactive materials through and within the state, and also establishes the Radioactive Materials Transportation Operating Fund. Bill begins by providing multiple definitions for certain terms that will be used in the section, including terms for radioactive materials like high-level radioactive waste, low-level radioactive waste, highway route controlled quantity, transuranic waste, and spent nuclear fuel. Another important definition is the term shipper, which is defined as the generator, owner, or company contracting for the transportation by truck or rail of those radioactive materials I listed. The bill goes on to make any shipper subject to the fees that are newly established for the transportation of those defined materials. Fees are paid to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, who and are due before the shipment begins. Listing of the fees is included in the bill for depending on the type of transport or shipment. It'd be $1,800 for each truck transporting high-level radioactive waste, transuranic waste, spent nuclear fuel, or highway route controlled quantity shipments. And these transports are also subject to a $25 per mile surcharge for any distance greater than 200 miles within the state. Additionally, there would be $1,300 fee for the first cask and $125 for each additional cask of high-level radioactive waste, transuranic waste, or spent nuclear fuel shipped by rail. And then $125 for each truck or railroad train transporting low-level radioactive waste, including $50 for each additional train car in excess of one. These fees will be deposited into a new fund, the Radioactive Materials Transportation Operating Fund, which will be administered by the Secretary of Health and Environment. Fund can be used for inspecting, escorting, planning, or the security of waste shipments, coordinating emergency responses, and education, training, and purchasing and maintaining equipment and supplies for local emergency responders, responding to radioactive material transportation incidents that may occur, and overseeing environmental remediation following a radioactive material transportation incident. And additionally, they could pay administrative costs for any state agency that are incurred through the agency's involvement in this program, or any costs associated with cleanup related to a transportation incident. The bill goes on to require advance notification by a shipper to the governor's designee, as that's kind of required by federal law for the transport of high-level transuranic waste, or high-level radioactive waste, transuranic waste, spent nuclear fuel, or highway route controlled quantity shipments before those shipments enter the state. And notifications of low-level radioactive waste transport are provided to KDHE and the Division of Emergency Management. Shippers who pay the fee or who fail to pay the fee are liable in the civil action requested by KDHE or the Attorney General, an amount not more than 10 times the original fee amount. And then subsection G provides certain exemptions for materials, such as those shipped by state-funded colleges, low-level radioactive waste meeting certain criteria, or materials shipped by the federal government for military and national defense purposes. Finally, KDHE is required to prepare and submit a written report to the legislature detailing the activities of this program, and is authorized to adopt rules and regulations to administer this bill in coordination with the Division of Emergency Management and the Kansas Department of Transportation. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
What? Question, Representative Neely.
Did we take this legislation from another state, these fees seem astronomically high for, $25 a mile, et cetera.
The bill was based mostly on a Missouri law that follows similar structure.
You have further questions, Representative Neely? Okay. Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as of right now, we don't have any structure in place for charging fees for nuclear materials that are being transported through the state of Kansas.
That might be better left for another conferee, but there is some sort of licensing. I don't know if it directly relates to transportation, though. So I think this is a new set of fees related just to transportation of these materials.
And when you say licensing, you're talking about the shipper, the actual person or entity that's bringing the material through the state?
Correct.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Advisor, where would the fees, I guess my question is, what would the fees be used for? Does it stipulate in the legislation?
Yeah, the fund, and it's in my testimony, it's basically for inspecting and escorting and planning, providing the education, training, purchasing equipment, supplies for local emergency responders related to transportation of radioactive materials. Additionally, possibly any cleanup that could result from any accidents that happen on the highway. All of those are allowable expenditures from the fund.
So would the funds be like an emergency type fund or a fund in which you could apply for a grant if you were a local community and you had a rail hub or something like that, and you had a lot of material coming through? I didn't know if it got that specific.
I don't believe there are any grants or anything that the fund could be used for. It could be that some of these are broad enough to include some of those programs also, but yeah, not specific.
Okay, and my last question is, can you say in layman's terms what the difference between low-level radioactive material and high-level radioactive material, according to statute?
I might leave that for the Department of Health and Environment. I think they're going to give some testimony and
Sure.
probably better versed in that than I would.
Thank you.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you tell me if this applies to just stuff that originates within the state or anything that comes through the state from another area going somewhere else?
It's both. So it could be someone transporting just intrastate or interstate would capture, and they have to provide notification before coming into the state and pay those fees before the shipment.
The state of Kansas currently doesn't have a very large inventory of this material, I'm guessing. Maybe K-State at the college reactor and Wolf Creek. Is there anything else that you're aware of?
And I'm not aware of that now, but as far as K-State goes, they would meet an exemption under the bill for those, since it's a state-funded institution. But yeah, as far as my understanding, there aren't many of these transports happening at the moment, but sort of future-looking.
But the fee structure being similar to Missouri makes it consistent across multiple states if it's coming from farther east, going west, or something of that nature. Is that correct?
I think that's accurate. Say yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, on page 2 of the bill, on line 7, it talks about before any shipments, fees have to be imposed or there has to be money already paid, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Just for imaginary purposes, say we're running a train, and maybe the train has 2 engines and 30 cars, and it gets put together in Springfield, Missouri. But now it's going to make a truck all the way through Kansas to, say, Colorado. With those 30 cars, we're going to pay $125 for that train, plus additional $50 for each car before it is able to leave the Springfield yard to traverse through Kansas.
I don't, yes, it would be on the responsibility of the shipper to provide those fees or potentially face some penalties if they don't. Under the bill, they are required to provide notification that that shipment will be coming through. So presumably when they provide that notification, that would be the time they would pay the fee as well.
Okay. Is there already a process with the shipping manifesto with the railroads, what's coming through Kansas or with this particular material?
I'm not aware of that.
And this is, I mean, it absolutely states, I guess, before this shipment, there has to be payment. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
First proponent I have, Representative Mark Schreiber. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Mark Schreiber, introduced the bill a while back. So this bill came to mind when I was, after I was appointed to the Council of State Governments Midwest Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee last year. And after a couple of meetings, they had a planning document, and in there was a table, and on my testimony, it's the second page, that outlines the states that have current fee programs for the transport of anywhere from spent nuclear fuel to low-level radioactive waste. And Kansas was not on that table. And I thought we would want to have that at least in our statute books, even though probably the volume isn't as high as what it might be in the future. But the goal was to get something out there so that we're not trying to do something in quick fashion when some of these shipments start. And just kind of want to go back and kind of clarify maybe what the reviser was talking about on the shipper, not the transport company. So it's not, wouldn't be BNSF or a trucking company. It's the producer of that waste, and they would have to pay that shipping fee. So just be clear on that. I understood the reviser might have said that it might be the people that are actually transporting it, but it's the shipper that produces that waste and then contracts with a shipping company to move it. So so that was my original interest. And going back into my career at Wolf Creek, back in 1998, the federal government had committed in statute that they would take possession of all spent nuclear fuel in the country and deposit it in a federal repository. And that started down the path towards Yucca Mountain, and many of us, I'm sure, have read all about it, and the controversy surrounding it, and back and forth measures. It was on, then was off, then it was on again, now it's off. So other measures are being taken, and at the plants that are still operating, well, actually the plants that have even shut down now, they're starting to store that spent nuclear fuel on site in dry casks stored on site. Wolf Creek just started within the last few weeks of storing that on site. And eventually there's going to have to be a process developed and a site developed to accept this waste. There have been several nuclear plants that have shut down for different reasons. A lot of them are in the Northeast, central United States. And most of the proposed waste sites through the years have been in the Southwest. So Kansas is probably going to be on that route somewhere, taking the waste from those plants that have been shut down or potentially will be, and moving it through our state to a repository. Right now, there are two that are under study. I'm not sure what the right name for the stage that they're in right now, but one's in West Texas and one's in eastern New Mexico, fairly close together, fairly close to their state line. But they're both going through some evaluation to see if they can be a repository, at least on an interim basis, for the spent nuclear fuel. As mentioned by the revisor, the funds that are collected through the fees and so forth be used to pay for preparedness activities by locals, by state, in the transport of this material, in case there's an accident, just to provide for protecting the health and safety of the public. In that regard, I know KDHE will be coming forward with some testimony as well. And the Kansas Division of Emergency Management has been involved with this Midwest Radioactive Materials Committee as well. And I've worked with both organizations for a number of years at Wolf Creek, and have full confidence that they're going to implement this fund, make sure the funds are made available and the training is available for those local agencies that might have a role in along one of these transport routes. So anyway, I'll conclude there. I'll take any questions at the end, or however the chairman would like to say.
Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, I got like a couple questions. First one is, why do we need this? I don't quite think I quite caught that in your testimony. Two, the feds, are they plumb out of the nuclear waste business now? And then three, how do we enforce that we're paid before they leave the yard?
Okay, I'll start with the first one. I think the first one, but the federal, as far as if they're still in the waste business or potential waste business, they are. I mean, the statute still exists, even though they've, it's way past 1998. And up until 2014, they were collecting, there was a mill put on all the electricity generated from nuclear power stations by the customers. Customers paid that and went into a nuclear waste fund. That waste fund then would pay for building a repository. I don't know an exact amount as of this date, but within the last couple of years I've checked, and I think there's somewhere around $40 billion in that waste fund that would be used to construct and operate a waste site. So that money is still available for the feds to use for a waste site. In my opinion, it's not so much a technical issue as it is a political issue. And once people start talking about a nuclear waste repository, then protests start, just like at Yucca Mountain and other places that have been proposed. We had a low-level waste site that was kind of a regional waste site that was proposed up in Nebraska. This was back in the 80s, I think. And I mean, it was just low-level stuff, and it drew some really strong protests. So I'm sure the feds are still engaged, but there are some, I think, more private entities that are looking at building the site, but they'd be under federal guidance, of course. And then, why? Well, so at some point, and this is only one area, spent nuclear fuel is going to move from individual sites to some repository, whether it's interim or permanent. And if it moves through the site, there are going to be needs by the locals, by state government, to be prepared in case there's an accident, to do it right, and have people trained. That's what these fees would pay for. But there's also other waste. There's low-level waste from hospitals, research centers, and so forth that get transported. Transuranic waste, I'm not sure how much that actually comes through Kansas. KDHE can address that. But my main focus was on spent nuclear fuel. which has not been transported from the commercial reactors, so. I'm old, I forgot.
Well, I'm saying my third one was, it was kind of follow-up to a previous question from a representative. You know, like it says, no train shall leave before we have, you can't ship it to us till we got the money. How you gonna, enforce that part?
I don't know what the actual logistics on that would be, but it'd be probably similar to any other, you know, when the shipper has all the paperwork done, because it's not just this, you know, it's not just these fees, but the NRC is going to have a role in all this as well. So there's going to be a lot of paperwork that's going to have to be done to ultimately ship these, and that's going to have to be part of that process before they ever leave the yard or truck station or whatever it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions that I need to ask.
Ask them slowly so I can remember.
Yeah, I'm going to go slowly. So just to be clear, at this point, we do not have this in place in this state, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I don't know, maybe I need to ask somebody else that. Why is that? Second of all, these fees that are going to be charged to the shipper, and we get those or whatever, does KDHE, they're going to be the recipient or the holder of those fees once they come into the state, correct? Right. Are they going to be used for training of like first responders, police, fire, hazmat, that would be on site?
Those would be typical areas.
They're already being trained for that. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that comes out of their budget, if some of that's, you know, paid for by the state or not. But I do know that they have active training. Most departments do anymore. Mm-hmm. And the third, I have a real issue with this third one, so we're going to spend a couple of minutes on this, is what is the difference between low-level waste, because I've got all kinds of stuff here that I can read, and high-level waste, high-level waste, which I'm going to assume is something that's like nuclear grade or nuclear weapon type grade waste. Or am I saying that correctly?
Kind of, yeah. But I think I know the gist of your question. So in the bill, the low-level radioactive waste is defined in the statute 48-1603, and I don't know that by heart. So, but that'd be basically, and I'll put it in kind of layman's terms, the low-level waste requires a lot less protective material around it. I mean, the intensity of the radiation is going to be a lot less than spent nuclear fuel, for instance. So that would be considered more high-level radioactive waste. And I'm just using general terms here, but there are very specific guidelines on how that's defined. And I think even on the high level, yeah, it's also defined in statute in 48-1603. And KDHE could probably give you a much more complete description of what that would be.
And I'll tell you the reason why I'm asking is that because I read this table that you had, and I happen to have, I pulled this off my computer just like a couple hours ago. And this is from the US NRC, US the National Regulatory Commission. Love that word. The association between radiation exposure and when I'm talking about if something breaks loose, a train car decouples or something like that, and whatever that material gets exposed to the elements. Exposure and cancer are mostly based on populations exposed to relatively high levels of ionized radiation. For those who don't know, I didn't know what that was either. I had to look it up. Ionized radiation is what occurs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima in World War II, and tests like Bikini Atoll. Or selecting diagnostic or therapeutic medical procedures. Now, the question is on all this, and you brought this up, that you said Wolf Creek, and I know Rocky Mountain Flats Arsenal, they were storing it out there, and I'm assuming they're still storing it because they don't have any place to put it, correct?
I think Rocky Flats is closed. I mean, I think it's been
closed,
redeveloped. It's been cleaned and redeveloped, I believe. I don't know. I don't know if KDHE knows, but I thought they had redeveloped Rocky Flats.
And
But it wasn't a commercial, whatever storage was there was not from the commercial nuclear industry. It was from the Department of Defense.
okay, well, what about Wolf Creek? You say they're storing it on site now. Okay,
Every nuclear plant storing it on site.
but that's a short-term solution, correct?
That's the way the nuclear industry was led to believe by the federal government, that it was going to be a short-term solution and they would take possession of it in 1998, which they did not do.
So it's
So these dry casks have been developed over time as people realize, well, we're running out of space in the spent fuel pools of the nuclear reactors, and we're going to have to move it to a dry cask storage area. And so the dry casks were developed, and tested, and, they're very sturdy, and they're located on site. And so plants now that have been running, Wolf Creek's been running for 37 years now, and it's licensed for another 23. So it's got more fuel assemblies to go.
So the question is, in my mind anyway, when these shippers move this material either into the state or out of the state or through the state, do they have to follow a certain protocol to, like you said, these dry casks? Do they have to encase or encapsulate that material to shield it?
Yeah, and I don't know that all that has been worked out because they aren't shipping any right now, but there will be, I'm sure, special containers, transport vehicles that will be used and I'm talking again about spent nuclear fuel, when that is shipped. And they're developing those things now, but it's still years away before these start being shipped to any kind of repository because there's not one that's licensed yet.
Indulge me for just one more quick question. When the shippers, either they're like a like Wolf Creek facility or something like that, do they have to use certain, I'm assuming commercial shippers that meet some kind of DOE protocols or standards when they move that either on a rail or a truck?
When they bring the new fuel into the site, they do, yeah. And I'm sure leaving the site, they would have to follow federal guidelines as well, yeah. Especially because it'll be interstate traffic, however it is, so, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Neely.
Okay, following up on my representative across over there, when he mentioned multiple railroad cars, and I guess it just hit me, the fees that they're talking about, again, is if they were going north to south across the state of Kansas, they would be looking at about $7,000 to cross the state of Kansas. And would that be per railroad car, per, how is that going to be done? And if we're charging these type of fees, astronomical fees and everything, are we worried that they will not justifiably tell us that they're doing it, or will they keep it on site and not ship it because it's so expensive to move it?
Well, as far as someone shipping it without notifying anyone, I would say that's probably nearly impossible. The NRC and DOE watch this material closely. They know where it's at. And if anybody tried that, and be some serious trouble for them. As far as the expense for it, I think the bigger expense, because since the federal government, in this case, has spent nuclear fuel, is supposed to take responsibility for ownership of that, then that relieves the utility from having to maintain those costs of storing it on site, excuse me.
All right, thank you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing the bill. When I look at the bill, I don't see kind of any quantity requirement or calculation in the fee. Is there one in there? Or is it whether you're, moving a pound or 500 pounds, that's based on the grade of the radiation?
And that I might defer to KDHE when they come up. They could probably explain that a little bit better. I hope they'll. But I didn't get that specific in here because we were modeling it after Missouri and they hadn't put it in there, so.
Yeah, so what I'm concerned about is you're creating a perverse incentive to cube out your vehicle because you have to pay, you have to pay the same whether the thing is, busting at the seams or there's just a little bit in it. And it seems like it'd be more dangerous to transport, that packed tight, vehicle full of radioactive material.
Yeah, I could see where you might consider that, but remember, there's going to be special vehicles that will contain this. It's not going to be, a typical semi truck going down the road with no shielding around it or anything like that. It's going to be designed to handle whatever quantity there is. Just because there might be a small quantity doesn't mean that there won't be need for more shielding or something like that on it, which might make it look like a big vehicle, but only a small amount comparatively.
I'll wait for KDHE because I got more technical questions than that. It goes up from there. Thank you.
That's good.
Representative Hogerson.
Currently, does the operators of Wolf Creek have fees in the rate base to cover the costs of the shipping and whatever's going to happen to the material?
They collect fees, or they put aside fees associated with decommissioning of the plant. So once it shuts down, I don't know this for sure, but I would assume those decommissioning fees would include transport fees for the spent fuel offsite.
Is there any problem? What you mentioned earlier, you wanted to get our foot in the door in the fees. Right now, do they have the authority? Does anybody have the authority to ship it across state lines, our state lines?
Spent fuel? No.
So by putting a fee structure in, we're allowing them to pay the fees and come across state lines. And right now, they technically can't do that.
They can't do it because there's not a repository. There's no place to take it.
Right.
So there won't be any shipments of spent fuel until there's a repository.
But even if there is a repository sometime, is there expectation that all states will agree to having nuclear waste go through that state?
No, there's no guarantee that any state will allow it. Some may put on stricter precautions. They might raise their fees, whatever it might be, to reduce the chance that might be transported across several states. But somehow, with just currently with the nuclear plants that have closed in the Northeast and Ohio River Valley, that most of the waste sites, I assume, will be in the southwest part of the United States. Kansas is going to be along that route more than likely, and as well as Missouri and Illinois and Indiana and Iowa and so forth. So it's going to have to get from one place to another somehow. And there might be some states that preclude that, but I would think that with the right training, The expertise provided like with KDHE and Division of Emergency Management. People will feel like, it's being watched carefully and monitored and transported safely.
Is the Wolf Creek plant able to store all of the spent fuel rods eventually?
Yes.
So there is no need for us to worry about shipping out our waste. We could just tell the plant to leave it there.
We could, but there's probably, if we don't build another nuclear plant in the country and all of them shut down, that's probably about approximately 100 individual sites across the country that will have dry casks stored on site. And of course, there'll have to be security measures and employees and stuff to do that. So it's a matter of, do you want to store it in 100 different places or in one?
And I'm weighing, okay, we have one here in Kansas, and otherwise we're going to have the 100 coming through the state going southwest.
And collecting all those fees.
Well, collecting all those fees, but if there's an accident, fees don't matter. It's not going to recover our costs. The fees are exorbitant, but nothing compares with the amount of damage that would be done if there's an accident or some kind of destruction.
Yeah, but I think, this goes back to my old Wolf Creek days when it was being built. People thought, it's just a big bomb sitting out there and there wasn't going to be anything growing within 10 miles of the plant. We had people testify on that. And of course, nothing was further from the truth. I mean, as I mentioned before, I think technology-wise, we have the technology to keep things safe. It becomes a political battle, and not that people shouldn't they should just accept everything, but I think there are enough safeguards that can be put in place that people can feel confident that their health and safety are being protected by folks like at KDHE and KDEM.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Representative Doperdane.
Bring it.
I've got a couple of questions. You're familiar with SMRs?
Yes.
Small modulars. I'm assuming in the future we're going to get some or more and more of those in the state of Kansas. So any concerns of this bill having negative effects as we try and invite those in or set them up, or
in relation to the amount of the fees, you mean?
well, the fees and the bringing in of the rods or the fuel, or
I really don't see that. I think utilities that operate nuclear power plants, I mean, yeah, it might seem high if you were shipping something from Amazon across state lines, but for this, I think they understand it's going to be costly to ship it, but they would rather have it off their property and put it with the federal government than leave it on that site individually. But I don't think that would be a deterrent from development of say an SMR project in Kansas.
okay. And then can I pick on you a little bit? But I've
been waiting for it.
I've got a serious question.
I know you do.
I've got a serious question, but this is the quote out of the Sunflower. There's radioactivity all around us. Just because something's radioactive doesn't mean it's necessarily hazardous to a person's life. But the potassium in bananas is radioactive as well. So the question, that sounds comical on the high side, but with this bill, are we going to start charging food trucks $125 per truckload for bringing bananas to the market, so to speak, or other items that may potentially fall into that?
I don't think that the definitions, and I haven't read them very recently, 48 and 1603.
We never got a true definition of low-level radioactive. And
yeah, I think
that would
it's defined in 48 1603, I believe. But
yeah,
but no, I don't. I think we'd be able to ship bananas pretty well across state.
I'm trying to be serious. Who was it that made that statement? I don't remember what it was.
I know him personally. I see
you
him
know
every
him
morning in the
personally?
mirror.
But no, I just want to make sure it doesn't
Yeah.
affect other aspects that we're not even thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that emit a small amount of radiation, not only food products, but,
Wind generator, magnets and stuff we got into, and sure.
yeah, there's all sorts of things, but they don't rise to the level of that require protective measures as what would be in.
And that's what I was trying to find out.
level
What
waste.
is the low level? And I don't
Yeah.
think we ever got
And KDHE will hopefully speak to that.
I think they just left.
I've been committing them to a lot of things. Hopefully they're not throwing darts at me.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I kind of got into this late, so I'm sorry if I'm asking a question that's already been covered. But we currently have rules and regulations where people get special permits with, I assume, Kansas Department of Transportation for oversized lengths. Do we also have those where they go to KDHE for hazardous materials, or do you know what are we creating an entirely new system here when I understand why KDHE needs to be notified? I understand the need for the fees and everything, but maybe it would be better served to go through our existing process. What are your thoughts on that?
As far as the placarding and regulations around hazardous waste or hazardous materials, I don't know how that would relate to shipment of radioactive materials. But certainly if there was a way to, if there was some common points between the two systems, I would think rather than trying to duplicate stuff, it'd be easier just to have them as one. But I think nuclear material is a little different than some of the hazardous waste as far as, how it's described, what it does and so forth. It's, it's as representative talked about ionizing radiation. That's a little different
I
than.
totally understand that it's not the same as all the other hazardous waste that transfer throughout the state. But we've got hazmat certifications that truck drivers have to have. Again, we have oversized loads that have to be approved by, I'm not 100% sure what deal, but it seems like we're maybe creating this totally separate group to monitor these, whereas maybe the appropriate thing would be a notification of this group that this load's going through. But you didn't work on, you didn't explore any of those.
I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Ballard.
Well, I figured everybody else giving you a hard time. I might as well join.
Pile on.
No.
Yeah.
But seriously, I don't want to give you a hard time. But what I want to know is, why is this so extremely important, and why aren't we doing it now?
Well, this is just a suspicion and it's nobody's fault, but with the demise of Yucca Mountain, there's no federal repository, so all spent nuclear fuels is stored on site. I don't think states really saw the need to start planning for that eventuality. But as some nuclear plants have started to shut down for a variety of reasons, a lot of the states listed on this are east of us, where some of those plants are shut down. They start thinking about, okay, these plants are being decommissioned now, that basically return to a green earth situation, except for the gas storage area, and eventually they're going to have to move those. So it's not that this is needed right today or by the end of the year, because it's not going to nothing's going to ship for some years down the road. But I at least wanted to start the conversation, and if we decide to have this approved, then have it on the books, so that when we get to that point, it's there, and maybe we have to tweak the amounts of the fees and so forth. And there's going to be some time to do that, but I think to me it's better to plan early than later.
I can appreciate that answer. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does anyone, I don't have any other proponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as a proponent? Seeing none, I have no opponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent? Seeing none, I have one neutral and would welcome Kimberly Steves. Hopefully I didn't mispronounce that too badly. Radiation Control Program Director, Bureau of Community Health Systems, Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Welcome to the committee.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really looking forward to all your questions. I'm Kimberly Steves, and I am the Director of the Radiation Control Program at Kansas Department of Health and Environment. So thank you for this opportunity to provide neutral testimony on this bill. I first do want to provide a little bit of background on our program. The Atomic Energy Act of 1954 provides a statutory basis under which the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission relinquished to the states portions of its regulatory authority to license and regulate radioactive materials. And in 1965, Kansas became one of those agreement states. And we have assumed this regulatory authority to regulate radioactive materials in Kansas. There are currently 39 agreement states. And as an agreement state, we are required to maintain regulations for radioactive material which are compatible with the NRC. Under this agreement, the NRC still does maintain authority over such things as nuclear reactors, anything belonging to the military or defense related, and belonging to federal agencies, even within our own state. The state of Missouri is not an agreement state. And the reason it's important to bring that up is that this legislation is written to mirror similar legislation in Missouri. Because Missouri is not an agreement state, it's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, not the state of Missouri, who regulates radioactive material in Missouri. In Kansas, we already collect license fees for some of the radioactive materials currently targeted in this bill as radioactive waste. The legislation augments those duties of the Secretary of Health and Environment with regards to the State Radiation Control Program by one, establishing a fee fund administered by the Secretary of KDHE for the transportation of certain radioactive materials through and within the state, adding the responsibility for reimbursing other state agencies for services rendered under this statute, adding KDHE as a recipient of notifications of low-level radioactive waste shipments in Kansas, and adding requirements for the department to prepare and submit a written report on activities of this fee fund to the legislature every 2 years. Though not specifically listed in this legislation, we anticipate that if passed, our program would begin an inspection program of radiation waste shipments and augment our staff training as it pertains to transportation and offer or coordinate training to local responders for response to transportation incidents involving these specific types of radioactive waste. We do have the following recommended revisions to this legislation for your consideration. First, this bill provides a definition of transuranic waste in Section 1, Paragraph A, Subparagraph 8, which is not compatible with the current Kansas definition. We request that the definition of transuranic waste be left as it is defined in KSA 48-1603 and the exceptions listed in the bill be deleted. The existing definition in 48-1603 is compatible with and has been approved by the NRC. It appears, we believe, that their exclusions listed in this legislation were added by Missouri because they are not an agreement state and they do not have the same regulatory authority as we do in Kansas. This bill imposes fees for radioactive materials transportation in Section 1, Paragraph B. We recommend that these fees be changed to maximum fees and allow the actual fees to be set through regulation by the Secretary of KDHE, and this would allow the department the flexibility to lower fees and regulation to ensure that fees meet what is needed to support the program without collecting in excess of what is needed. This bill states in Section 1, Paragraph D, that nothing in this section shall preclude any other state agency from receiving reimbursement from KDHE for services rendered. We request wording be added to protect the agency from being required to reimburse for more funds than are collected in fees. We are proposing that all Kansas radioactive materials licensees be exempted from this legislation in Section 1, Paragraph G, for two main reasons. First of all, in the legislation, it lists number 2 under G, all sealed sources meeting the definition of low-level radioactive waste. It is possible that some of our licensees might have unsealed sources meeting the definition of low-level radioactive waste, and that also don't meet number 5, the half-life equal to or less than 120 days. And that is because of new technologies in the medical field, generally medical facilities and hospitals, that have those type of unsealed low-level radioactive waste. And the second reason is because there are Kansas radioactive materials licensees which would fall under this bill, and that would lead us to double charging them both for their radioactive materials license in Kansas and for these shipping fees. Accordingly, we propose an additional exemption be added to Section 1, Paragraph G, which would state any Kansas licensed radioactive material. The addition of exemption for Kansas licensed radioactive materials may also eliminate the need for the exemption 4 found in Section 1, Paragraph G, which currently exempts Kansas licensed naturally occurring radioactive material because it would be covered. We are neutral on this proposed legislation. We are also aware that the NRC has licensed an interim spent nuclear fuel storage facility in Texas. If construction of that facility comes to fruition, it could in future years increase the number of high-level waste shipments which are transported through our state. Therefore, it does seem prudent to establish this program ahead of time to ensure that our state is prepared for these shipments. We also note that all of our neighboring states have enacted some type of similar legislation. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments. And as I said at the beginning, I'm looking forward to your questions.
Questions? Representative Francis.
This might be a question for the prior conferee, but when we're talking about spent fuel rods, which I would imagine is part of the impetus for this, what size of a load are we talking about? Are we talking about a semi-truck load? Are we talking about a intermediate cargo truck load? Or
the casks used to ship spent nuclear fuel are very specialized. They are right now in Colorado testing a rail car that would be a whole rail car to transport those. As Representative Schreiber said, there is not a lot of that transportation happening right now. However, there is on the military side because nuclear submarines are nuclear based. There is spent nuclear fuel being shipped primarily by rail, some by highway. It is very secure, escorted, and that type of thing. Mostly it would be a specialized vehicle if it was a semi-truck or a train cask, because they are designed and follow U.S. Department of Transportation regulations to protect the spent nuclear fuel from about anything you can think of happening to it.
And does your agency currently regulate some of these?
No, that is all regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And
how do you plan to coordinate with like the Highway Patrol and the Department of Transportation and some of those as these hazardous waste?
That's a good question, and that's a process that will have to be worked out. What I have done so far is talk to our neighboring states. I did go, the National Council on State Legislatures has a nice report on what states already have a similar type legislation as this. So we took it, we put it on a map so we could see where they are, and we've started reaching out to them to find out how they do it. A lot of them do use their highway patrol as escorts. The route controlled and the highly secured stuff, they have only safe, secure locations where they stop for inspections and such, and we would have to arrange to meet them there to perform the inspections. I do believe that it would be radiation control staff that should do the inspections just because of our level of training in radiation, but we would have to partner with the Highway Patrol, with the Department of Transportation, with Kansas Division of Emergency Management to work out the whole process, and that appears to be what the other states have been doing.
I would think we would want designated routes also to travel across the state. You just don't want them to pick whatever route they want to take.
Yes, I agree. And the process is already in place in the other states, and they do that. They pre-map out their routes, and that's what they report is what routes they're taking, and they take main highway routes. Low-level radioactive waste is a little bit different. There's not very much of that shipped at all. But for the stuff like defense-type stuff and spent nuclear fuel, that is all route planned out and everything. Yes.
And I promise, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask one more question and then shut up. I don't want to outwear your goodwill. Do you do anything similar with biohazard waste? I mean, I would say that this would be comparable.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't answer that because I only do radiation. So I don't know. I'd be happy to check with our agency and get back to you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask the same question I tried to ask before. Is there any kind of like quantity structure in this bill to say this qualifies as, or how much it costs to transport based on weight or quantities or anything like that?
It's not in the bill. Typically, because when you're transporting radioactive material, especially high-level radioactive waste, you use special vehicles. So they would put it's exclusive use vehicle for that purpose. So it would be that vehicle or that semi or multiple semis, all for that use.
And on low-level radioactive waste, what kind of materials are going to get transported under that?
So as I said, very little. Most of our low-level radioactive waste comes from the medical use of radioactive material, unsealed radioactive material, and it's going to be like the gloves or the syringes or that type of thing. Most of them are short-lived. As I mentioned, there has a half-life equal to or less than 120 days. And what the hospitals will typically do is hold it in a secure location till the radioactive material has been decayed away, so they can dispose of it as just regular waste. There are some cases where low-level radioactive waste is transported. For instance, if we had a contaminated site, and we do have some of those in Kansas, where there is radioactive material in the soil, in the environment, or in a lot of things where it's not medical and it's not short-lived. And in those cases, a licensed waste broker typically comes in, collects it all, packages it all according to DOT requirements for transporting everything, and then it's transported. There is only one place in Texas that accepts low-level radioactive waste right now.
Is tritium considered a low-level radioactive waste?
I believe tritium is a low-level radioactive waste. Yeah.
The reason I'm asking is a lot of military equipment, like sights and tanks and artillery pieces, things like that, have tritium in them.
Yes.
And I'm afraid that we might inadvertently cause them to have to pay a fee every time they move a tank or a truck or whatever. Is there any language in the bill that exempts them or?
That's true. And I was going to say that about bananas too. We have to remember that this bill is dealing with waste. So things that are not considered waste don't apply at all. So it just depends on what it is.
So if one of those sites or whatever breaks, does it then become waste and then it has to be transported according to this bill?
Generally, for items that we license that have sources in them, when they are done with, whoever's done with them, they return them to the shipper. They're not returned as waste. They're returned as an item that's being returned to the original manufacturer. So it's not categorized as waste. Waste is for disposal. So something contaminated with tritium, I'm not seeing that falling under this bill.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, are lithium-ion batteries considered low-level radioactive material? I know there's a lot of hazardous materials contained in, especially these lithium-ion batteries for EV vehicles. So I didn't know if you had a comment on that.
I don't know the answer to that question. I know we talked about smoke detectors because they have a small americium source in them, and that is exempt unless you gather a whole bunch of them together. But I don't know about lithium. Yeah. Okay, so it could be considered waste after the manufacturer is disposing of it. More likely to travel through Kansas and originate from Kansas.
Thank you. That just came to mind because I know this legislature has passed a recent incentive bill to attract a mystery company to the state. So I didn't know if there was any connection or anything there we needed to be concerned about. Thank you.
Representative Ballard.
Oh, that was sorry, I had to laugh at that one. Well, that was a jab. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. In your response, when you came up, some of your objections really were that there's a lot of Missouri regulations that are included, and it may not be accurate because they are not a member of.
They're not in agreement state.
They're not in agreement state, okay? And then you said there might have to be adjustment of fees later on. But what I heard you say last is that you were in agreement that the state should be prepared down the road. So in essence, you agreed with a lot of what the legislator
concept.
before you, the concept, okay? Would you just tell me what is your biggest concern about it, or was it something else other than what you mentioned?
No, we really don't have concerns besides just getting the wording right in the legislation. Our biggest concern would be how it impacts our radioactive materials licensees that are already paying fees to us that we already regulate. Other than that, it would just be trying to figure out how to best implement it to serve our residents and our emergency response community.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Helgerson.
You don't regulate any high level, do you?
High level waste. No, I don't believe so. High level waste is primarily such things as spent nuclear fuel, defense type stuff, maybe some uranium processing that's not in Kansas. So no, we do not.
But the fees that are set out in this, and the bill talks about high level, not low level. We've gotten off the topic. Or is this both for high level and low level?
Both.
It's for both. Okay. And how many trucks or what's your fee structure right now? And how much is in the fee account?
Well, we don't have any fee structure for transportation of radioactive waste right now. What we do is we license those users who possess and use radioactive material in Kansas. So we don't have any fees for anybody transporting from another state through Kansas. But our concern was that it could impact some of our licensees in Kansas, especially hospitals and medical institutions who might have some low-level radioactive waste that's unsealed.
You have procedures right now for them coming across our borders?
No.
So we're going to put a fee structure in place for regulations that we don't have yet.
Correct. We will have to generate the regulations.
Okay. With regards to the Texas site that you referred to, how long would it take for that to be permitted and built?
I would anticipate that it will take a while, years.
10 years, 20 years?
Could be.
Okay. And you're still neutral, correct?
Correct. KDHE is neutral.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I have no other neutrals listed. Does anyone wish to speak as a neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2630. Committee, I would bring your attention to final action that I would like to take a look at today. Starting off with House Bill 2567. Revisor Wagner, when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee House Bill 2567 would increase and decrease various fees relating to registration and titling of vehicles and changes where certain fees and portions of those fees are deposited. Some of the categories affect as far as the fee reductions, personalized license plate fees, registration of antique vehicles, many others. Basically, this corresponds to removal of a requirement by the county treasurer's division of vehicles and contractors of that entity to deposit certain portions of the fees into special funds to help pay for administrative expenses. So as I said, that would be removed. And then in Section 8 of the bill, it creates more of we're calling a uniform service fee of $10 for all vehicle title applications, registrations, and renewals processed by the division and county treasurers or contractors. That Section 8 also removes the ability of county treasurers to charge additional other fees on registrations and renewals, like facility fees and various other types. And then Section 13 provides a fee increase for salvage vehicle permits to operate on highways. The fees increasing from $1 to $10. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for the revisor? Seeing none. Committee, what's your pleasure? Representative Helgerson.
After the hearing, I raised the question whether or not $10 was going to be enough over a several year period. If you look at the problems we're having as a state agency, and if you've had this conversation with local counties and cities, they have a difficult time finding anybody to come in and fill the positions that they have now. I hate doing this, but I think that the $10 won't be sufficient in order to deal with it over a period of time. And so I have an amendment, and I propose that we adopt it from instead of $10 fee, but $12. And hopefully that's going to reduce some of the other fees. I think they have the opportunity of charging, at least in Sedgwick County, a building fee or whatever they call. But I'd rather get this taken care of for several years rather than to come back in a year or 2 years from now saying it's still not enough money. We're still having a problem. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have more. Do you have copies of it? I will make the recommendation or the amendment that we change on page 2, line 4, it's page 29, line 4, that instead of $10, and it was previously $5, the bill had 10, that we move it to $12 as the fee for a service fee is what they call it.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Ballard. Are there questions? Is there discussion? Representative Ballard.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember, but I asked him the question that if he was raising from, I think what it was, 1166 or whatever, to the amount that he was raising, that wasn't in keeping with Target or McDonald's or anything else. And was this just to keep your employees? And the conference response was yes, it would be able to keep them, but maybe recruit some people that was interested in this area, and that would help. But he certainly didn't say this is going to cover the problem, but they were doing what they had to do. So for that reason, I do agree that we should go on and raise it, because in essence, he was saying they were doing desperately what they had to do to keep people working and to recruit. And I think maybe this would be a little more help for them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Further comments, questions? Representative Howe.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question about the process of the fee collection. As I understand it, the county would collect the fee, then the fee goes to the state, then it comes back to the county. Is that how it works?
Revisor.
In the case of this fee, states the county treasurer division or contractor shall deposit all amounts received under this section in the special fund created by KSA 8-145. Such amounts shall be used by the county treasurer division for all purposes for the fund that the fund was created. So I don't believe they keep this particular fee.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, Representative Helgerson, you may close.
I'll move the amendment.
You've heard the motion to amend. It was seconded by Representative Ballard. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. We're back on the bill as presented. Representative Helgerson.
Well, I lost the last one, and I'm not going to try it again. I'll make a motion that we pass the bill out favorably.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Ballard. Is there further discussion on the Representative Proctor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, for the record, before we vote, want to say that I think with inflation as high as it is right now, I think that fees like this hit folks at the lower end of the economic scale particularly hard because for them, registering a car or doing whatever, getting a license plate renewed is a serious expense. And I just don't like the idea of funding our government on the backs of the poorest people. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further comments? Representative Hilkerson, you may close.
I'll close.
Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Ballard.
Thank you. I would agree that the poorest have a difficult time doing this, but when you are short on workforce and you may not have anyone in your office that can help these people that really need their help, I think the average person would prefer to have someone answering their phone, giving them direct services. And I don't think they really worry about the fee. They would just like to get the help that they came to get. And if they're short of staff, it's very difficult to do that. And I know people have problem with fees, but we right now have a big problem with workforce and no one available to work. I think we have to consider that as an option too. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Francis.
I think everybody has to vote this based upon what they feel like is best for their district and best for the state as of a whole. But one of the things is this isn't being passed on the backs of our poorest. What's not being raised here is being paid by all of us in property taxes at home because the fees don't currently reimburse the treasurers enough for the costs that they're incurring to provide this service for the state. So again, I think everybody has to pass this based upon what they think is best for the state. But we're paying these funds one way or the other. We can either pay it as it's tied to our registration, or we can pay it as we pay our property taxes to the county to subsidize the service. Thank you.
Any further comments? Seeing none, Representative Helkerson, you may close.
I'll close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Helkerson to pass House Bill 2567. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Noes appear to have it. Division's been asked for. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay. Those opposed? Passed 12-2. Committee, I'd like for us to take a look at House Bill 2594. Revisor, at your convenience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2594 would exempt certain modifications on antique vehicles from the statute that provides procedures for VIN offense seizures and dispositions. The bill currently would create an exemption for antique vehicles as defined, vehicles 35 years or older, and allow for the removal and reinstallation of a serial number or VIN on an antique vehicle if the removal is reasonably necessary for repair or restoration of the antique vehicle. It would not apply if the person knows or has reason to know that the antique vehicle is stolen. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Other questions for the revisor? Seeing none. Representative Delperdang.
I'd like to make the motion this, let's see, we move the bill forward favorably.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Hoheisel. Is there further discussion? Representative Delberding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was discussion when we heard the bill about a possible loophole, the way we've got it written up. So with that in mind, I do have an amendment.
Okay.
Chris, do you need more? Just in case you got. While the
Yes, go ahead and explain your amendment.
Okay. While the revisor's passing it out, appreciate it. I'm going to label this as more of a technical amendment, but the question came up, I believe it was Rep. Proctor that brought it up, of what happens while the vehicle is being worked on, while the VIN plate is not physically attached during the restoration, and would it be considered contraband at that time? So I'm hoping to fix that with the way we broke it out here, rather than, it's kind of the same wording, except we added, I want to call it a section B in here, that the person completing the repair or restoration of the antique vehicle installs the manufacturer seal or the VIN immediately after the repair or restoration is completed. So it's just saying that we've got a plan. If it comes off, you fix it and it needs to go right back on. So just kind of a technical fix, if you would.
Are there questions on the amendment? Seeing none? Your amendment was seconded by Representative Hoheisel, so you may close.
I would stand for any questions if there are. It doesn't sound like there is. So with that, I will close.
Heard the motion by Representative Delberding to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment has been passed. Now we're back on the bill as amended. Is there further discussion on the bill? Representative, did you make a motion on the bill? So we need it as amended. Okay, we need a motion as amended.
I move the committee recommend HB is a 2594, I'm sorry, favorable for passage as amended.
Second by Representative Hoheisel. Is there discussion? Hearing none, you may close.
Okay, just a closing comment. I apologize to everybody whose mailboxes have probably blown up over this one, but I have not received a single negative email so far, and my box kind of blew up too. So I appreciate everybody hanging in there, and with that, I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Delberding to pass House Bill 2594 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Bill is passed out. Committee, that completes our work for the day. We do have several bills that we're going to take a look at tomorrow on final action. And so with that, we are adjourned.